Eleanor Roosevelt said once, "A woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong it is until it's in hot water." It's very true. As that relates to women and to mothers, when the hot water occurs or when difficult times come, we often witness the explosion of strength, this inner resolve to take charge, to get things fixed as you would want them to do. In childbirth alone, women frequently endure and experience more anguish and pain than scores of men who are sent out to war. In my own family, with my own wife, our first child, the labor was 40 hours. My second child, it was 30 hours. The last was a piece of cake. It was only 12 hours. Mothers have this incredible ability to live with pain. The pain I would never be able to live with. Women are often the unsung heroes behind any major victory, any major discovery, and any moral campaign. Throughout history, when men were off in battle, women held down the fort, assisted in creating and sending supplies, ran businesses, maintained the economy and the community, and even farmed, all the while taking care in managing their own homes. Women have always held a place of influence in culture, even if it hasn't been publicly recognized or legally allowed. The 19th century author Virginia Woolf wrote it wisely. She said, "I would venture to guess that Anonymous, who wrote so many poems without signing them, was often a woman." Women have been equipped with such an innate capacity for influence that they can change the world. Some for good, some not so good. Take, for example, Samson, who could defeat an army with the jawbone of a donkey, but he became like putty in the arms of a woman. David, he killed a giant with the bravery and bravado of a gladiator, and yet one look at a bathing beauty brought him to his knees. Women, though, however, are far more often an influence for good. As it has been written, mothers write on the hearts of their children what the world's rough hand cannot erase. And that's so true, is it not? I think our culture has given us a mirage about men. It leads us to think that men they're the ones who are in power, they're the ones who have power, they're the ones who control, they're the ones who influence the most, and nothing could be further from the truth, in my opinion. Women have a major influence for good in our society, and certainly in the home. In fact, I don't know how many times I've seen this happen. When men have acted correctly or wisely, oftentimes it has been because of a wife or a mother who has encouraged that man to a path that is right and that is godly. I've seen that so many times. And if you really want to know the influence of women in the lives of men, all you have to do is just take note of the words that some man may sing about a woman. In the soundtrack of the movie Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, here's a character of great power, strength, who would battle enemies in difficult and dangerous scenarios. Yet the lyrics of one of the songs in that movie points to a woman being behind all his forays. As it states, "Everything I do for you." And take the song first done by Percy Sledge, "When a Man Loves a Woman," later covered by Michael Bolton in more recent times. It has a great line in there. It says, "When a man loves a woman, he'll trade the world for the good thing, woman, he has found. Rarely does an epic movie finish without somehow uniting or reuniting a man and a woman. You know, one of the most popular shows today are network stations. It's a Hallmark station. And my wife watches that often. And I say to her, you know, the script is the same just about every time. I mean, I could write the script. I mean, just pretty much, you know, you take two strong-willed people, man and woman, put them in an environment. They don't like each other at first, but they begin to be attracted to each other, and they kind of like that challenge. And before long, they fall in love every time. I mean, just about. Isn't that right? Just about every time. Well, women grace this planet with insight, with sensitivity, with spiritual beauty that has put them behind many great accomplishments, as well as many great men. In fact, the popular saying rings true: the hand that rocked the cradle rules the world. And another saying, behind every great man is a greater woman. That is never more true, I think, when it comes to a godly woman. What I call and what we refer to today as a kingdom woman. Take, for example, we have many in the Bible, but let's go to a modern-day example. In the mid-1700s, there lived an old saintly woman who everyone called Mama Newton. She was a lady that all the children of the neighborhood wanted to have as a mother. They said she had hair like a halo of silver, hands worn with calluses, and cheeks that were stained with tears. Every day and every night, you would find Mama Newton crying and praying over her wash tub in a room of poverty. She was praying for her son, John. His father and everyone that knew John had disowned John because of his wayward ways. But she kept praying continuously. She believed in two things. She believed, number one, in the power of prayer, and she believed, number two, in the conversion of her son. Well, God granted her prayer one day when John Newton, this sailor who had left home as a teen and gone to become a sailor and who had lived a wayward life. But this wayward sailor had been changed to a preacher sailor. And when he was 54 years old, he wrote what I would say is the national anthem of the Christian church. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Now follow this. That song, of course, has been used to lead thousands of people to Christ. Wouldn't you agree with that? But now follow this. This all begins with a mother. God used John Newton to reach thousands of people. One of those people that he reached was a man by the name of Thomas Scott, who with his voice and with his pen was used to lead thousands to Christ. One of those persons that was led to Christ was a man by the name of William Cowper, who penned the immortal words of a hymn. It's one of my favorite hymns in the hymnal. There is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunged beneath its flood lose all their guilty stain. All of that began with a praying mom. Moms never underestimate how valuable a praying mom is, a kingdom mom, if you will. Now, ladies, mothers, and perhaps young mothers, some of you sometimes will feel as if you're stretched thin. And then you might read Proverbs 31 and become, even when you read what the virtuous woman does, you might even become more discouraged and depressed by seeing all of those things. It's kind of like some years ago there was a cartoon that pictured a psychologist talking to a mother. He said to her, let's see, you spend 50% of your energy on your job, 50% of your energy on your children, and 50% of your energy on your husband. I think I see the problem. Some of you mothers may feel as if you've been stretched. And you'll look at Proverbs 31 and you'll say, wow, I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that. I want us to take a different look at Proverbs 31. I preached on the whole passage back, I don't know how many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. But today, we're not going to look at the whole text of Proverbs 31, the virtuous woman. It's often referred to as. I want us to review quickly what she does, and we're just going to review them, and then we're going to kind of get to because I really think that in the latter part of this passage is the heart of what God wants the mother, the woman, the kingdom woman, we might say, what He wants her to know more than anything else. You see, if you are a mother and you read Proverbs 31, and you see, man, I'm going to strive to do all these things here. If you do that, you're going to be like a Coca-Cola that has lost its fizz. You're going to fizz out. What you need to know is the heart of the passage, which I think is listed in verse 30. But let's, before we get to verse 30, let's look at what the virtuous woman does. And just again, mention those. In verses 10 through 12, she seeks always the good of her husband. It says, her husband's heart trusts in her. Verse 20, she spends time ministering to the needs outside of her family. In verse 23, her husband is built up by her to the point that he is known throughout the city. In verse 25, she has an inner strength and optimism. In verse 26, she has control of her tongue and she speaks in kindness habitually. Verses 27 through 29, she is constantly looking out after the welfare of her family. Now, all these things are wonderful things, great things. But I want to speak to you ladies today about kind of putting things in the right order. If you look at verse 30, it says, charm is deceitful, beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Now, most of the time when I hear people preach on this, and I've been guilty of this as well, they list verse 30 as, and that which is mentioned there, as one of the virtues among many in this passage. And certainly it is a critical virtue. But if you were to go back to chapter 1, verse 7, you would read, the fear of the Lord, this is not on the overhead, but it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. I would contend that the fear of the Lord is arguably the theme of the book of Proverbs. And so thus, if you put it in the context here, I think he's saying to the lady, remember above all else. In fact, here a couple techniques when it comes to Bible study methods is, number one, what an author says at the beginning of a chapter or even at the beginning of a passage, paragraph, mind you. Also, what someone says, what the author says at the end of a book or of a chapter or of a paragraph sometimes. When people call you or when you call people sometimes, what happens? Well, you may talk about the niceties, you might bring those up to them, but often people hold what they really want to say until the end of the conversation. That's why I always try to put it right out there so they won't think, well, the last thing they talked about was what they really wanted to talk about. Well, that often is true here. In fact, if you were to look at 2 Timothy, the last chapter of 2 Timothy, the last chapter that the Apostle Paul will ever write, read those words. Incredible stuff there. Very personal stuff from the Apostle Paul. But if you look at this verse, it says in verse 30, charm is deceitful, beauty is vain. Let's just look at that. Deceitful is a Hebrew word which means the liar, a falsehood, unreliable. The word vain, habal, it means to be empty in act or word or expectation. But note the rest of it, though. It says, a woman who fears the Lord will receive the praise that is due her. Listen to this. When a woman understands who she is and how God has made her, when he understands, in fact, the passage that we read earlier, that God knew her, knew you before you were even formed in your mother's womb. In fact, I would argue, even before the foundation of the world, he knew you. When a woman understands that God has made her, she will pursue her destiny in light of that reality. She will recognize that God knew me before the foundation of the world, and thus he has a plan for my life. Remember, in fact, you've heard me talk on children, raising children, and one of the things I've said is that all children have a bent. They actually have two bents. One's an old nature, sin nature, but the other bent is one that God has created, and I showed in the Hebrew text how that is true. God gives every child a bent. I have twin grandsons. They are as different as night and day. They couldn't be any more different. We're all different. God has made us unique. What too many women frequently do, and men too for that matter, is they base their decisions on trying to please others, or trying to earn acceptance or appreciation, or even a sense of worth for their decisions, for their appearance, or for their action. That's not what God wants for us. God never said that you will receive praise from him by seeking to please others. Let me say that one more time. God has never said you will receive his praise by seeking to please others. Only by seeking to please him. A.W. Tozer, in fact, we asked the question, what is fear? When we read the text about fearing God, and before we move on, we need to kind of examine that. Fearing God is not thinking that God is this celestial cop in the sky that's kind of waiting to kind of zap us as soon as we get out of line. You know, Morgan, stop having fun. Psst. No, he's not that at all. So when we read the words fear of God, often that conjures in a person's mind this awesome God, and he's awesome, but one to be dreaded. Not so. Not so at all. We need to recognize this, that God is sovereign. You've heard me talk about God being sovereign recently, meaning he's top authority. And we need to respect him for the fact that God, and get this, God writes the final chapter. He gets to write the final chapter in our lives. And he can write it sooner or he can write it later, depending on whether or not we're obedient to him. So we need to recognize and respect him for that. But fearing God is often thought of as reverence. And it's all of that, but I think it's much more than that. Fearing God is better understood this way. Listen to what A.W. Tozer has to say. The fear of God is astonished reverence. I believe the reverential fear of God mixed with love and fascination and astonishment and admiration and devotion is the most enjoyable state, the most satisfying emotion the human soul can know. You see, this is what the woman is. First you saw what she did. This is what she is. She's a woman who delights in the Lord. I have a good friend, Dr. Ray Pritchard, who said this. I thought it was so good. He said, "It is a choice I make to obey God because I love Him and want to please Him. The fear of the Lord is an ongoing attitude of my heart that causes me to choose over and over again to obey God, even when it might be easier to do something else. I make the choice," and watch this, "I make the choice because I love God and I want to please Him. The fear of the Lord is not cringing fear, which is respect without love. It's not irreverent flippancy, which is love without respect. Respect plus love equals the fear of the Lord." Boy, I thought that's so good. Respect plus love. Go with me to Psalm 34. If you want to, you can just watch the overhead. Psalm 34. In verses 8 through 10. It says, "O taste and see the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in Him." Now watch this. "O fear the Lord, you His saints. For to those who fear Him there is no want." Now, I believe that fearing God, loving Him, is almost synonymous with seeking Him. Watch the next verse. "The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing." Those who seek the Lord. One of the things I like about these new automobiles, and I finally quit driving a car that was 20 years old and bought a new used car, and it has a compass. It has a virtual compass. Mine does. It's not one of these deals that's got the N and the W and S and all that stuff. It doesn't have that stuff. Mine has a virtual compass, and I kind of like that. And of course, that compass is fixed on what? The north, right? It's fixated, in fact. It's oriented to the north. It is set on the north. That's the type of, when we talk about the fear of God, that's what we're talking about. One whose mind is fixated on pleasing God, not the world, on finding out, God, what do you want for this child? What do you want for our children? God, I pray for the heart of this child. I pray for you can go on all day. Colossians 3. Let's go there real quickly. We've been studying that in our men's study in the morning. And Colossians 3 kind of ties into this, I believe. It says, "Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ," literally you would translate this, "since you have been raised up with Christ," in the Greek text. He says, "Keep seeking the things above, where Christ is." Now, let me just say this. The word keeps, or the two words "keep seeking," are in the present tense in the Greek text. Of course, the New Testament written in Greek. And it means continue, habitually, constantly. Keep seeking the things above. Now, why does he tell them to seek the things above? Well, the church at Colossae, though it wasn't exactly pure Gnosticism, they were battling Gnosticism, or a form, I would call it a form of Gnosticism, even before Gnosticism kind of came down the pike. And it was philosophies, nice platitudes, pious things, warm and fuzzy things, that nice things in life, but it wasn't the truth. Now look, he says, keep seeking the things above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind, here's the present tense again. Keep setting your mind on the things above. Now watch this, not on the things on earth. Not on the things on earth. Mothers, you are going to be challenged. Women, you will be challenged to fit into the world's mold. You'll be challenged to think the way the world thinks. You'll be challenged to think that your kid has to be this, has to be that, and you'll be gravely mistaken. You'll think that you need to do all these things, and sometimes you'll burn out as a mother thinking you've got to do everything in Proverbs 31. How many of you, probably most of us, but how many of you have seen a glass of water with it's filled up 2/3, and someone drops a fork or a knife into that glass of water? What happens? That fork looks as if it's been broken or it's been bent, right? You've seen that? That's called refraction. It's not bent. It is simply the light makes it look that way. The world tells us this is what's important. It's a refraction when it comes to living in the world. It makes you think that reality is this. Just by like you look at that knife or fork in that glass, it makes you think that that's true, and it's not true. It makes you think that your faith, the world will give you a refraction about your faith and say, telling you your faith it's nothing. It's useless. Why bother? And remember, our faith is based upon one who knew us before we were ever formed in our mother's womb. You see, the kingdom woman is not duped by all the trappings of the world that say you are not significant if you do this, or you are significant when you do this. The marketplace does not control a woman who fears God. Television, magazines, blogs, social media sites do not pull her away from that fixation on God. Her friends don't dictate her emotions or her decisions. The culture doesn't define her. God defines her. In fact, she has God esteem, I prefer to say, versus self-esteem. You see, she's made the transfer, and we talk a lot about knowing who you are in Christ, and I think it's so vital to live in this society. But she, the godly woman, the kingdom woman, has made that transfer, where she's no longer thinking about what the world thinks or what others around her may think about her, but she's thinking about what God thinks about her. Even her own ambitions don't dominate her. The primary influence in a kingdom woman's life is God. His voice, and get this, His voice is the loudest. He's the one that she seeks to please. So, how do you become a kingdom woman? How do you fear God? Let me give you some simple steps, and we're going to dismiss you early so you can hit the restaurants early, beat the other Christians. Let me give you some steps. It must begin with a relationship with Christ. It must begin with Look, we're not talking about religion. You understand that? We're talking about coming to the realization that Christ died for my sins. We've all missed the mark. That's what the word sin means. Hamartia. It means to miss the bullseye. We've all missed God's perfect standard for us. And Christ says, hey, you can't earn your way to heaven. Try as you might, you'll never make it. But I've put the bridge. I brought a bridge that will allow you to transcend this world and live in eternity by trusting Christ, realizing that He died for my sin and for yours. That begins with a relationship, but it doesn't stop there. You understand that? Mothers, the most important thing you can do in your children's life is to impart biblical truth. Now, you can't do that if the well's dry. We've been emphasizing a lot lately about having quiet times with the Lord, and several of you have been telling me, hey, I've changed my ways and I'm having quiet times now. You can't impart truth to your children, and it should be imparted as you walk by the way, as you lie down, as you whatever, in the car, at school, or at home, wherever it might be. You can't do that if you don't have a relationship with Christ, a personal relationship with Christ. And Christ desires to have a personal relationship with each and every one of us. Secondly, you must not get the cart before the horse. Some mothers, for some reason, have come to believe that, quote, exhaustion is close to godliness. Not so. Don't be a martyr. Look at verse 31 closely. If you look at verse 31, in verse 15, it talks about, Proverbs 31, verse 15, I should say. It says, she rises also while it is still night and gives food to her household. Now watch this, and portions to her maidens. How was she able to do all these things? She probably didn't do them all at once. But she had a lot of help. Any of you have any maidens that live in your home? Servant girls, as some translations say. You need help. Don't try to be the superwoman as a mother. Seek out help from others. And let me encourage all of us, and especially older ladies, to seek to help other younger mothers as well. And then the last. Remember Martha and Mary. You know that story, don't you? We all know that story. Martha was in the kitchen preparing for Jesus to arrive. Jesus arrives, and Mary, what does Mary do? She falls at his feet and she worships him, and Martha walks in and she says, tell her to get out there and help me. We got a meal to make here. And what did Jesus say? Martha, you missed it. She's got it right. She got it right. Christ was first before, and there's a great symbolism there. It's not just a story, there's great symbolism for all of us to walk away with. Remember Martha and Mary. Mothers, we appreciate you. We love you. We can't say enough about what you do